to CNN In Depth, we're taking a close look at the exploding fallout surrounding the hacking scandal in Britain. Rupert Murdoch's News Corp dropped its bid to take over British satellite broadcaster B-Sky B today. Murdoch's withdrawal comes as Prime Minister David Cameron blasted Murdoch's company and launched a high-powered investigation.
Well, I think this is the right decision. I've been saying that this company clearly needs to sort out the problems there are at News International, at the News of the World. That must be the priority, not takeovers. So the right decision, but also the right decision for the country too. But we've now got to get on with the work of the police investigation and the public inquiry that I've set up today.
But Murdoch's troubles may extend far beyond the English Channel. As the pressure builds and more investigations are launched, there are now serious questions as to whether Murdoch's News Corp broke U.S. law by bribing foreign officials. U.S. Senator Frank Lautenberg from New Jersey is urging Attorney General Eric Holder and the head of the Securities and Exchange Commission to launch an investigation. His comments echo warnings from Senate Commerce Chairman Jay Rockefeller, who voiced concerns over if Murdoch's journalists targeted, hacked 9/11 victims as well. I want to bring in Richard Levick, who specializes in crisis management as the president of Levick Strategic Communications. He joins us now from D.C. via Skype. Richard, you've been following this very closely. How deep do you think this all really goes?
You know, this is not about a lone reporter. This is about a business practice. You have 40 years of Rupert Murdoch intimidating politicians, and now it's payback time. So I think that's a challenge. The other challenge is this is not a British or an Australian company. It's a global company. And the questions in a very anti-Machiavellian way, by that I mean bad news over time is being leaked out. Every day we're learning new revelations, and all the optics are bad. Hacking into the phone of a 13-year-old girl who would later be found to be dead, hacking into the phones of now 9/11 victims apparently, hacking into the phones of deceased British, Afghan, and Iraq war veterans. All of that speaks to a way of doing business, and for Rupert Murdoch, for the entire enterprise, those are very difficult questions to deal with. They're not going away anytime soon.
Questions and allegations, we should point out, as the investigation continues. But I do want to ask you about this civil lawsuit against News Corp that was filed in Delaware. We also have the senators now wondering whether or not U.S. law might have been broken. I mean, is this just the beginning, do you think?
I think it is just the beginning. You know, if you ask the question, is this pattern in practice, and it goes back at least 6-7 years in Britain, what about his other properties? The Wall Street Journal, who I might add, has been tepid in its coverage here. You know, if this was the New York Times who was alleged to have done this, I don't imagine there's enough newsprint in the world for them to have put out their coverage. And yet when it's one of their own, when it's their owner, we see about one story a day on average. What about Fox? So does Roger Ailes have some investigations to do now on his own? Is this what journalism has become? You know, the question for Rupert Murdoch, when he was asked yesterday morning what his first priority was, he put his arm around his number 2, Rebecca Brooks, and he said, she's my number 1 priority. She's not his number 1 priority. The value of the Fourth Estate is what his number 1 priority is. Is this what journalism has become?
How do you think he's handling this? I mean, what would you advise him? Is there something that he can do better?
Well, one, this is known as a tsunami. You know, unless you've been in this kind of storm before, he's not only dealing with legal issues and investigations in Britain, he's now being called before Parliament. It's not mandatory, but he needs to decide if he wants to go. I think he's hard-pressed not to go with his son and Ms. Brooks. He's now being investigated for what's known as FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act investigations. He also has stockholder litigation, which you alluded to. So, and the list goes on. So this is just the beginning. How has he dealt with it so far? Usually when you make a sacrifice. You know, and the old saying in crisis is the gods of Washington and London demand the sacrifice. Usually sacrificing the News of the World, sacrificing the B-Sky B deal would have been enough. But in this case, they may be enough for some audiences. But because he's dealing with 40 years of having offended and intimidated large numbers of politicians, competitors, and others, it's going to go on for some time. It's historic in nature, and no, I don't think he used his weekend very well. I don't think he realized Monday morning just how significant this crisis is.
If you had to bet, you think he'll appear before Parliament or no?
I think he has to. If he doesn't, he's showing himself to be frightened. If he does, that's the moment where he needs to pivot and use it as a platform. One of the things that's been missing through all of this is him announcing a top-to-bottom investigation. You know, I'm not so sure that News of the World was much of a sacrifice. It's a 168-year-old enterprise, highly profitable, but how much of it is he just shifting over to the Sun newspaper, which has historically been underperforming? B-Sky B, significant sacrifice, but for how long? It clears up, it frees up an immense amount of liquid capital for him right now, which means in another year or two, he'll be in an excellent position to decide what to purchase at that point. So, you know, what have been his sacrifices? He has not announced the kind of deep investigations, and he's not made any human sacrifices. You know, his son, James, is still there, who signed the checks for the investigators. Miss Brooks is still there, who knew or should have known the kind of behavior that was being engaged. You cannot hire investigators for $100,000 a year and say, go find the story, and then not ask how it occurred.
All right, Richard Levick, appreciate your insight, and certainly the story isn't going away. I'm sure we'll be talking to you again soon. Thank you.